Upper lid retraction is that the lower lid will be at normal position and upper lid will be raised. If it is at the tangent position or above that, then you will say it is upper lid retraction only. You will not say that it is exophthalmos. So once the lower lid will be visible, so normally it should be at this level, but as you see, it is the lower lid is going below, exposing the part of the sclera, and the upper lid is also.
We shall discuss examination of a thyroid swelling. So basically, can you guess what is difference between these two eye signs? One in the right side and the one in the left side.
This eye, and one of the picture is this eye. What do you infer by these two pictures?
Exophthalmos.
Exophthalmos. Uh, are they similar or they different?
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, in the right photo, sir, the lower limbus is not in contact with the eyelid,
Okay.
and sir, the pupil also appears to be in a more constricted appearance than the left photo.
Okay.
Meiosis.
Rightly spotted, and this is one of the important finding. So in the lecture, I will clear it to you. These two pictures are different, and the diagnosis of these two pictures are different. In the subsequent slides, I will let you know what is the difference between these two eyes. And what do you see in this picture? Here is a person which you see, and he has raised his both hand. Now you see a redness on the face. What do you see? Okay. Okay, people are commenting rightly. It's a Pemberton sign, and I will let you know, guys, what exactly is a Pemberton sign. So now coming to thyroid history proper, they usually present with chief complaints of swelling in front and sides of the neck, or difficulty in swallowing, breathing, pain over the swelling, and hoarseness of the voice. Let me tell you first what other history will you take in any case, like hernia, thyroid, peripheral arterial disease, varicose vein, be it any case. So you have to follow a particular guideline. I have made a mnemonic for that. You follow a guideline of A, B, C, D, E. A, B is just the regular stuff like site, onset, duration, whatever is being taught. C is complication related to it. If it's a thyroid swelling, then you will ask the complication of the thyroids in terms of either hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, or in terms of pressure symptoms, either pressure on the esophagus, recurrent laryngeal nerve, or on the larynx, and differential diagnosis. Because it's a swelling in front of the neck, most likely thyroid, we don't have a differential diagnosis here. So we won't take a history of differential diagnosis. But in a case where you have some differential diagnosis, then you ask history pertaining to differential diagnosis of your present diagnosis and etiology of your principal diagnosis. So swelling in front of the neck or lump in front of the neck, your principal diagnosis will be a thyroid lump. Then you'll ask about etiology, like whether the patient is of endemic zone of goiter or not, whether is there any history of thyroid illness in the family, any history of hypothyroidism in the family. So genetic etiology, you'll take it. So you will follow A, B, C, D, E. A, B is just the regular step which you are being taught. C is complication, E for etiology, and D for differential diagnosis. So you have to cover these things. So in thyroid case, you should ask about the age of the patient, because multinodular goiter, solitary thyroid nodule, and colloid goiters are usually found in women of 20 to 30s. And there is a very peculiarity in thyroid regarding carcinoma of thyroid, that it does not necessarily a disease of old age. Even papillary carcinoma occurs in young girls, and follicular carcinoma occurs in middle-aged women. And you should take history of the gender because the thyroid disorder is common in females, and residence because iodine deficiency endemic goiter is present in hilly areas like Himalayas in India. So coming to the detailed history of the swelling, which usually present in front of the neck, you must ask the duration. But as I mentioned, papillary and follicular carcinoma usually occurs very slow. The rate of growth is very slow. So they may exist as a lump in the neck for many years before metastasizing. So if someone is telling that I have a lump in neck for 20 years, so do not assume that it's a benign lump. A thyroid swelling may exist for a longer time. A thyroid malignancy may exist for a longer time before metastasizing. While in other areas, like if you have a swelling in the arm, if it is there a history of longer duration like 10-20 years, then you may assume that it's a benign swelling. But in thyroid, you may not assume the same. So you will ask about whether the swelling was sudden in onset or insidious in onset. Sudden in onset is usually occurs in thyroiditis. Some after viral illness, the swelling appears. Insidious onset in benign and malignant tumors. And you should ask about site of onset, whether it was on the front of the neck or the side of the neck. And what is progression of the swelling, whether it is gradually progressive or there is a history of rapid growth. So you will ask about whether there is pain associated with the swelling, the usual history of the pain, like duration, site, character, which is usually dull aching in case of thyroid swelling, and whether there is any radiation of pain or not, and relieving and aggravating factors. And pressure symptom as a complication of our principal diagnosis. So if it compresses on the trachea, then difficulty in the breathing. If it compresses on the esophagus, then difficulty in swallowing. If it compresses on the recurrent laryngeal nerve, then hoarseness of the voice. So you must rule out these histories, whether the patient is having these symptoms or not. And any symptoms of hyperthyroidism, like weight loss with increased appetite, diarrhea, palpitation. So you may categorize these into various organ system, like GI system, weight loss with increased appetite, diarrhea, cardiovascular symptom, palpitation, CNS symptom, irritability, on slight provocation, insomnia, bulging of the eyes, increased sweating, and heat intolerance. While symptoms suggestive of hypothyroidism, you must exclude are weakness, lethargy, puffiness of the face with pouting lip, menstrual problem, constipation, intolerance to the cold. So you should also inquire about the past history of any irradiation of the neck, because it is associated with thyroiditis as well as causation of lymphoma in the neck. And you should exclude any family history of thyroid disorder in family members, like autoimmune thyroiditis, and any history of family cancer. Do you know which thyroid cancer is familial in nature? Please unmute your mic and let me know, or type in the comment box. Medullary carcinoma of thyroid. Good. Utsav Rajvanshi has rightly commented, and Divya, Tanvar, Gunjan, Manan, Shruti Pandey, everyone is right. So since medullary carcinoma is familial in nature, then you must exclude a family history of similar swelling there. And usually family shares the same kind of food. Like in hilly area or iodine deficient area, everyone will use same type of salt. So if you suspect a colloid goiter and you suspect a similar type of diet, then you may think that there may be some other family members which will be having the same symptoms. So you should also inquire about the treatment history, whether levothyroid supplementation in form of levothyroxine. They usually remember it by the brand name. The most famous is L-Troxin, or any anti-thyroid drugs in case of hyperthyroidism, or beta blockers. And dietary history, type of salt, whether they are using iodized salt or not, and excessive intake of Brassicaceae family. The Brassicaceae family have a property of anti-thyroid suppression. They do thyroid suppression. So hypothyroidism occurs who take excessive intake of Brassicaceae family. Or she fishes, they also have anti-thyroid property. So now coming to examination of the thyroid swelling, you'll first see the faces of the patient, whether there is any thyrotoxic symptoms on the face, whether it is mixed edema faces or not. And then you will look for pulse, rate rhythm, preferably a sleeping pulse in case of hyperthyroidism. If someone asks which type of pulse you'll see, you'll say sleeping pulse when patient is quiet. And you'll look for wet or sweaty hands. So you can look for these symptoms of hyperthyroidism either in general physical examination or after completion of the local examination in terms of inspection and palpation, auscultation and percussion. After that, you can do that. So you will follow the usual sequence: inspection, palpation, percussion, and auscultation. But in case of neck swelling, the thyroid swelling, you also examine the cervical lymph node, examination for toxic signs, examination for retrosternal goiter, and to look for tracheal positioning. So in inspection, you will see for position and extent of the swelling. You should see in respect of the sternocleidomastoid. Is my face visible? Can you see my neck? So you will see in terms of sternocleidomastoid muscle, suprasternal notch, and thyroid cartilage. So you will describe whether the swelling is below the thyroid cartilage and extending to the suprasternal notch and laterally going below or deep to the sternocleidomastoid. Usually it goes deep to the sternocleidomastoid. So if a swelling is in this size, you will say you will say the size of the swelling and the shape of the swelling. Then you will say it is extending from suprasternal notch to the thyroid cartilage in vertical extent and laterally from midline to the going deep to the sternocleidomastoid. So you have to describe the swelling in terms of fixed landmark on the neck. In any swelling, you have to describe the swelling in terms of, am I audible properly or not? Someone said there is a connectivity issue. Please confirm whether I'm audible and visible or not. So everyone says I'm audible and visible properly. So you will then comment about the shape of the swelling, whether it is oval, spherical, or even the butterfly shape. If both the lobes of thyroid will enlarge, then you will see a butterfly shape or size, and you will measure it in vertical and horizontal dimension in centimeters, and the surface of the swelling, whether it is smooth, irregular, and nodular. Usually multinodular goiter is nodular in nature. It will be a bosulated swelling, and the margins, whether they are distinct margin or not. And then you will look for skin over the swelling, any scar, pigmentation, any scar of the previous surgery, any venous prominences, any pulsation over the swelling. Then you will see movement of the swelling with deglutition. So if you will not say this in history, because the history is what patient tells you and what you infer about the whatever patient is telling you. What do you infer from that information? So patient will never tell you that my swelling is moving with deglutition. So one of the common mistake you people do in exam is that you say in history itself the swelling is moving with deglutition, because patient will not tell you that the swelling is moving with deglutition. So it is one of the important finding which you will demonstrate in the examination, not in the history. Are you getting my point? Okay. So you must know what are the movements that moves with deglutition. The important ones are the thyroid swelling, subhyoid bursitis, prelaryngeal and pretracheal lymph node. Any swelling arises from the larynx or trachea, and thyroglossal cyst. In a thyroid case, examiner will definitely ask this question. Once you say that, sir, this swelling is this type and shape, and in last you will say that it is moving with deglutition. Then the next question examiner will ask, what are the other swelling that moves with deglutition. Then you have to enumerate these differential diagnoses. And if it is thyroglossal cyst, then it will move with protrusion of the tongue. So then you will proceed for palpation, you will look for temperature, tenderness, and you will confirm the movement of swelling with deglutition by holding the swelling and protrusion of the tongue. And you will confirm all your inspectory finding in the palpation, like position and extent of the swelling, the shape and size of the swelling. You will palpate for surface and margin. The standard method of examination is either you ask the patient to swallow some liquid or you ask the patient to just deglute the saliva, and you stand behind the patient. Say suppose my patient is standing here, I go behind the patient and with my 4 fingers I palpate the swelling, and then I fix these thumbs on the occiput of the patient like this, and then palpate with my 4 fingers like this. So this is a standard method of examination. So once you tell that I have palpated by going back, then examiner will ask what are the other methods you know of to examine the thyroid. Can any one of you let me know the other methods which you know for examination of thyroid swelling apart from the standard method? So Gunjan has commented that it's a Lahey's method, correctly commented, and Kryle's method. Then you look for consistency, whether the swelling is hard, firm, cystic. So how will you differentiate whether the swelling is hard, firm, or soft? So a rough guide is that ear lobule is soft, tip of the nose is firm, and this is hard. And for muscle, uncontracted muscle is firm. If you contract, uncontracted muscle is soft. If you contract it, then it becomes firm, and the bone is hard. So either of this you can choose. And you'll then look for any pulsation and thrill of the swelling, any skin fixity on movement of the swelling, and whether the swelling is moving side to side and up and down or not. And you'll see for relation of the swelling to the sternocleidomastoid, whether it is going deep to the sternocleidomastoid, as usually thyroid swelling goes. And you must look for position of the trachea. So either by inspection or by palpation or by auscultation. There are three methods. So in inspection, you will see a trail sign. If say suppose the trachea is deviated towards the left side, then you will see prominence of the sternocleidomastoid on the left side. This is known as the trail sign. It will be visible on inspection. Then you will palpate. The method of palpation is that you put one of the index finger on the sternal prominence, the ring finger on this, and you palpate the trachea with the middle finger, and then look whether you look for the tracheal ring, whether it is centrally placed or not. Or you will put the stethoscope and then ask the patient to breathe in. So breathing
method is done in obese patient with short neck. Patient keeps both his hand on his occiput and then extend his neck.
And the Lahey's method is that to palpate one lobe, you push from, like in this, if you want to feel for the left lobe, push from the right side. The left lobe will be prominent. You place the pulp of the thumb over the swelling and you ask the patient to deglute. As the swelling moves with deglutition, then you pulp of the thumb, you will be able to differentiate whether the nodularity is present on the thyroid or not. So what is Cocker's? You unmute your mic and let me know what is Cocker's and what it denotes. So the test is written, but you have to tell what it denotes.
Sir, this is due to scabbard trachea.
Do you know what is scabbard?
Yes, sir. Sir, it is a sheath for holding
So
a sword.
this is the Cocker's test is for tracheal compression. What happens in long? There is a tracheomalacia. Trachea becomes flat. The circular becomes this, like scabbard of the sheath of the sword. This is the sword, and this is myan. It becomes anteroposteriorly compressed like this, as you can see in the bronchoscopy image. This is anteroposteriorly compressed trachea. So Coccystesis is done for tracheal compression to look for trachea. What happens in long-standing thyroid is that due to long-standing pressure, trachea get, which is known as tracheomalacia, anteroposteriorly compressed, as you can see this in this bronchoscopy image, and this trachea is compressed here. So this is known as scabbard trachea. Scabbard is talwar sheath of the sword, and as you can see in this image, it is anteroposteriorly compressed. Press the thyroid lat, then there is accentuation of this anteroposterior compression. And once the patient inhales, then there is stridor. It is actually, this test should not be demonstrated actively, but for older shake, you must know how to do it, because if the patient is normal and you then the patient develops stridor and breathing difficulty, then patient may collapse actually. So, but as I already mentioned, for examiner, you must know what is the theory behind and how to demonstrate this test. So this is Berry's sign. Berry's sign is to look for actual malignant infiltration of the carotid sheath. What happens in malignancy of the thyroid is that the carotid sheath is infiltrated. So once you palpate for the carotid pulse, just lateral to the swelling, then you may not be able to demonstrate the pulse. But if you palpate in superior or inferior extent, then you may be able to demonstrate the carotid pulse. So non-palpable carotid pulse due to actual malignant infiltration of the carotid sheath, this sign is known as Berry's sign. As you can see here, in this extent, so swelling is this big. So here the carotid pulse will not be palpable. But if you palpate above, or if you go here, there is no area left. So if you palpate above, then you may be able to palpate, but just lateral to the swelling, if there is actual malignant infiltration, then you will not be able to palpate the carotid pulse. This is known as Berry's sign. So you must look for the signs of sympathetic trunk palsy, which is also one of the compressive symptoms which I left in the history. So the mnemonic for learning Horner syndrome is AMPLE. A for anhidrosis, which is loss of sweating on one side of the face. Miosis means constriction of the pupil. Pseudotosis means drooping of the eyelid. And loss of ciliospinal reflex. Can any one of you know how to demonstrate the loss of ciliospinal reflex? Then you will proceed to the percussion. Normally, normal thyroid will not go behind the retroesternal area. So if you percuss it, it will be resonant. But if the thyroid goes behind the sternum, and it will occupy the area, then once you percuss that area, then it becomes dull. So if the sternum is dull to percuss, then you will infer that the thyroid is going retroesternally. So if your examination viva is going very good, then examiner will ask you what are the signs of retroesternal extension of the goiter or thyroid. How do you confirm whether the thyroid is going retroesternally or not? So then you will auscultate for any bruit which is audible or not. It should be done near upper pore of the thyroid lobes. And then you will proceed for examination of the cervical nodes. So as you can see, the examiner is looking at the upper fold of the thyroid, near the upper pole of the thyroid. Can any one of you let me know why it is important to auscultate near upper pole and why not the lower pole? Because if you are looking for bruit, then we should look for the vessel which is larger. And most of the thyroid is supplied by the inferior thyroid artery. And superior thyroid artery is smaller as compared to inferior thyroid artery. But still we are looking for the bruit in the superior thyroid artery. Why? So Rahul Singh has rightly commented the superior thyroid artery is superficial. As you can see in this diagram, the inferior thyroid artery is deep, though it has a larger caliber, but it is deep. So bruit will be appreciable more in the superior thyroid artery location. Are you getting my point? Let me know in the comment box. Okay. So this point is clear. So then you look for toxic signs. So you look for pulse in terms of rate, rhythm, volume, any special character like collapsing. In hyperthyroidism, you'll see for collapsing pulse. It's actually part of general physical examination. If I take your lecture on general physical examination, then I'll let you know about all these pulses and what you should do and how you should do. And then you look for tremors in hand and tongue. You'll ask the patient to outstretch the hand like this, and then you'll place a piece of paper and look for whether there are tremors or not. And you'll ask the patient to fold the tongue and look for the fine tremors of the tongue. And then you'll look for thrill and bruit as a part of toxic examination also. So this is the demonstration of looking for hand tremors as well as the tongue tremor. So you can ask the patient to fold the tongue also. And then you will look for the eye signs. So wherever you are sitting, just whoever is close to you, just ask them to sit in front of you and look directly towards you and look at the position of the limbus. So you will see that the superior limbus, the superior eyelid is located at level of halfway between the pupil and the superior limbus, and the inferior eyelid is just at the tangent of the inferior limbus. You guys do this exercise. I'll wait for 1 or 2 minutes. Just ask any of your family member or whoever is available and look at their eyes in a normal relaxed position when they are looking in front. So I'll try to look in front of you. So see my eyes, my lid should be at the half of the superior limbus as well as the pupil. It will cover the half distance from the superior limbus to the pupil, but my lower eyelid will be tangent to the inferior limbus. So superior limbus and inferior limbus, you know, this is the superior limbus, the upper margin, and this is the inferior limbus, the lower margin, and this is pupil. So upper eyelid will be covering halfway between the pupil and the superior limbus, and lower eyelid will be covering at tangent to inferior limbus. So this is clear. Everyone is getting my this point. This is seen in normal patient. Are you getting my point? Okay. So what happens in upper lid retraction is that the lower lid will be at normal position and upper lid will be raised. If it is at the tangent position or above that, then you will say it is upper lid retraction only. You will not say that it is exophthalmos. So once the lower lid will be visible, so normally it should be at this level, but as you see, it is the lower lid is going below, exposing the part of the sclera, and the upper lid is also moved, and in this they are widely moved. So this is known as exophthalmos, and upper eyelid retraction is different for exophthalmos in terms that the lower lid will remain at the normal position. So in your NEET entrance examination, this picture may be put because this is very important clinical difference, which most of the MBBS graduate don't know. What is difference between upper lid retraction? So the examiner will take a screenshot of this and put your NEET entrance examination and ask what is this, and the first option will be exophthalmos, and 99% will jump and take the exophthalmos. So if the lower lid position is normal, then it is not exophthalmos, it is upper lid retraction. So I am going back to my previous picture which I show in the beginning, which you guys didn't interact with me much. Now, one of you unmute the mic and let me know what is this and what is this. So now this will be clear. So you should be brave enough to talk to me. Am I asking too much
Sir,
in
first one is
interacting?
lead retraction, second one is exophthalmos.
Okay, very good. So because this is, so this lower lid position is normal, but the upper lid has moved this. So this is upper lid retraction or simply lid retraction. It's not an exophthalmos. But in this picture, as you can see, both lid position has moved. Then it is exophthalmos. And what do you see in this picture? What is it? Unmute on mic and let me know. Sagar, what do you think this picture is?
Lead retraction, sir.
Yeah, very rightly commented. Most of the student will jump and say that it is a exophthalmos because you say staring look and all those things. But you must look for the lower lid position first. It is just at the tangent to the inferior limbus. Do you see my cursor here? My laser pointer in red? Okay. So this is severe upper lid retraction. And one of the methods to look for exophthalmos is Navier-Stokes method. You should go behind the patient, look from the behind, and ask the patient to slightly extend the neck. And from that, imagine a plane just going along the superior orbital margin like this. And if your eye is bulging from that plane, supraorbital margin plane, then it is exophthalmos. If it is not, then it is not exophthalmos. So this is known as Navier-Stokes method. So can you see the eye is bulging from the supraorbital plane, the eye is bulging outward. This is exophthalmos. So now coming to various eye signs, you will be asked both in NEET entrance examination, in your professional examination, as a important question, as a theory questions. Write about eye signs of hyperthyroidism or toxic signs of hyperthyroidism. This is important NEET question as well as the professional exam question as well as the clinical examination question. So this lecture is very important in all point of view. So Dalrymple sign is visibility of upper sclera due to spasm of the upper eyelid. Von Grafe sign is lid lag. So I have made a mnemonic, foolish one, but you will be able to remember it by assume that long neck of giraffe causes lag in eating the grass. If the giraffe is taller and have a longer neck, then there will be lag in the eating of grass. So Von Grafe sign, you refer it to giraffe and you remember that it is a sign for lid lag. So it appears foolish, but I actually remembered it by this method. So I am telling you guys. And Geoffroy sign is loss of wrinkling. As you see in this patient, there is no wrinkles on the forehead on looking up. So most of you guys have seen Game of Thrones. So I have made a mnemonic that you remember frown of King Joffrey, the most villainous character in Game of Thrones. So there will be loss of wrinkling in forehead in Geoffroy's sign. While in Mobius sign, you remember it by mnemonic that excessive mobile usage is called failure of convergence. So in Mobius sign, there is failure of convergence on accommodation at near object from distant object. You'll ask the patient to relaxedly look at the distant object, then you place a finger or a pen nearby and ask the patient to look near and you look whether there is convergence or not. As you can see, asking the patient, the eyeball should be here and it should converge, but there is loss of convergence in this patient. This is known as Mobius sign. Are you guys getting my point or I'm just talking to myself? So there is a still wag sign, which is infrequent blinking and stare look. And the mnemonic for is that still wag is still look. and you must see for conjunctival chemosis, or you must see for any palsy in movement of the eye. You must have taught in ophtha that you make a H-shaped movement to look for movement of the eyeball. So there are some eponymous signs like Vigoro sign, which is eyelid fullness and swelling, as you can see in this patient, and Gifford sign, which is difficulty in everting upper eyelid. So I will tell in Hindi. बचपन में जो हम डराते थे छोटे बच्चों को अपर आईलिड ऐसे ऊपर करके, so if you are not able to do that, then it is Gifford sign. Difficulty in eversion of the upper eyelid is Gifford sign. So in this patient you will not be able to do that. And inroad sign is edema of the lower eyelid. As you can see, there is lot of edema. This is known as inroad sign. These are eponymous sign. So you should be aware. These are not important things. You should be well versed with the basic, but if you know, then this is good. And now Coker sign, which is increased lid retraction on visual fixation. You ask the patient to look at the fixed object, then the lid will retract further. This is known as Coker's sign, and that is also Coker's sign. What are the other Coker's thing which is asked in surgery? Once you say that I have demonstrated the Coker's sign in the thyroid as well as the Coker's eye sign, then the examiner will ask what are the other Coker's forceps. Vipul Patnaik has rightly commented. Coker's incision, Sweta Gupta has rightly commented. It is right hypochondrial incision for open cholecystectomy and the Coker's vein. So you must remember this auntie or this sister, whatever you say, for toxic signs of thyroid. Examiner will ask what things you should be well versed. You say eye signs, neck bruit, hand tremors, and sweaty hand, and tachycardia in terms of sleeping pulse, sleeping tachycardia. So pulse, tachycardia, when you see the sleeping pulse, it will be tachycardia, hand tremors, sweaty palms, bruit, as well as the neck sign. So one important question is that how will you look for retroexternal extension of the goiter? So you must think in a logical manner, because in examination you have some sort of pressure, because there is a lot of pressure to just pass, not actually know the basics, just pass the exam. So there are a lot of pressure, and in exam pressure you tend to make mistake. So in that circumstances, you make a systemic way of thinking. Like if someone asks a question, then you think what are the things in the history and what are the things will be in examination. Like retroexternal extension, you will say in history the patient will tell that I am able to see the lower margin. And then in examination, you will be able, on deglutition, you will be able to see the lower margin. And then in palpation, you will be able to feel for the lower margin of the thyroid. Which some examiners say that you may be able to go below the thyroid. And on percussion, you will say that it is dull. And in history, one thing I missed, that you will see that there are engorged vein on upper part of the chest or on the neck. And then you will demonstrate the Pemberton sign, which should not be actively demonstrated, because due to compression at the thoracic inlet or thoracic outlet. So there is no difference between thoracic inlet and thoracic outlet. Both are the same things. The surgeons say it as a thoracic outlet, and the anatomists say it's a thoracic inlet. So SVC is compressed, and then you ask the patient to raise both limb like this for 2-3 minutes due to compression of the SVC. at the thoracic inlet position, there will be puffiness and congestion of the face, and patient may land up in respiratory distress. So exam में patient मिला and you are examining the patient and you ask the patient to do Pemberton sign, patient end up in respiratory distress and collapses. So you can assume what examiner will do with your mark. So you must not actively demonstrate this sign, but you should know. And then you will percuss on the manubrium sterni for any presence of dull note. So as I showed in the previous slide that so you see after raising the hand, because of the compression at the thoracic inlet, there is congestion and puffiness of the face. And this is the method to go below the thyroid swelling. Actually look for lower pole is palpable, lower limit of the thyroid swelling is palpable or not. So thank you guys